bring this work session to order. We'll start with introductions. Start with you, Mr. Dyson.
Dyson.
Okay.
Dean Gates, Assistant Council.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant. Dick Train. Tom Wellington.
Pete Peterson.
And on the phone, could we introduce ourselves to the record?
Yes, Pyro Furman.
Felix? Felix, are you there? I think you might be on mute.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. I'm here.
Okay, Felix Rivera is with us. Okay, and we have Matt Seaholm on the line as well. So we only have one agenda item today. It's the proposed plastic bag ban. The two sponsors are here now. Do you guys have a preference on who you'd like to talk first? Do you want to have Dean give his presentation?
Let's have Dean give his presentation.
So we'll start with Dean, and then we're going to let the member from the industry speak, and then we'll allow anyone else here from the administration to speak. We'll go in that order. Then we have John as well with a variety of examples. We have an hour scheduled for today, but if we go long, there's a chance we might do another work session in the future, or perhaps there's another one already scheduled for 10th. Great. Okay. All right. So we'll start with you, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I put together a short PowerPoint presentation. I'll try to keep it short so we have time for other people to comment. So basically, before I start, I want to thank my assistant, Natalie, for helping put this together. Excellent job. So we have seen in recent news and some opinion pieces that it's time that a lot of Alaska communities have passed a ban on plastic shopping bags from retail stores. And there was an opinion piece not long ago from Sophie Tidler, who says it's time for Anchorage to have one. Sophie's here with us today. I understand her group has been advocating for plastic bag bans across Alaska. So hopefully she will comment on things as we go along. So it's obviously a problem in many communities. So on the other side I'll show there's a list of them. Palmer's the latest that passed an ordinance in May. So the issue is really that plastic bags create a lot of wind-blown litter that pollutes our landscapes, the wildlife and waterways that collect them, it damages them, their digestive systems, it kills moose and so forth. Waste management, it clogs drains and some of the machines that absorb recyclables and clutters the landfill. So we did some research on different bans across the country as well as in Alaska. And there's some options we put together, as you see in the two ordinances that we created. So a lot of communities, well not a lot, but several communities have an outright plastic bag ban. All plastic bags for taking your product from the point of sale at a retail seller out are banned, all of them, no matter the size, thickness, or so forth. So obviously better for the environment overall, but maybe costly on retail sellers. So we've seen though alternatives to a complete ban. There's a single-use plastic bag ban where many communities set a thickness threshold, and maybe it applies only to certain retail sellers and so forth. But the emphasis is single-use bags that are used once and typically thrown away. And those are the ones that I guess are more likely to pollute our environment. And then we've seen some that are a plastic bag fee hybrid, and we'll talk about that a little more. Those have a little more effect in terms of encouraging or enticing consumers to bring their own reusable bags by having a fee on bags provided by the store that are not banned, and banning plastic bags of thinner thicknesses. So allowing thicker plastic bags that maybe meet a standard that's called reusable, or allowing reusables that are by cloth, canvas material, and so forth, that requiring the retailer to impose a fee. Now we've seen in some places that there was talk of a tax on these, and someone imposed a fee instead to reduce the community's carbon footprint. So the ordinances that you have before you have a whole bunch of details, and there's many things for you to consider in terms of policy choices. And I tried to outline some of them here. I'm sorry, the print's a little smaller than I expected. So one is, what is a usable? How do you define these? A single use or reusable bag. So jurisdictions have settled almost unequivocally on a 2.25 mils thickness as a cutting, I guess, threshold between what's reusable and what's single use. Single use typically will tear easier with items in it, sharp objects and so forth. And then the thicker it is, it's more durable and meant to be used in rough. So we had seen in the lower 48 some studies done where they have tried to define reusable as being able to carry a certain amount of weight, a certain distance for a certain number of uses, 75 uses and so forth. We have seen that in the state legislation that was proposed. See, the choices you have are single-use ban, or do you want complete ban on all plastics, or a hybrid? How do we define single-use, which I touched on mostly? And there's a list of exceptions we'll get to. Should plastic bags be allowed at events and events on municipal property? You see that in the ordinance. I will touch on that. That, I guess, is to say, well, the municipality as a landowner wanted to ban plastic bags, but the ban for the area-wide ban maybe only on certain retailers and allows some of them. For example, Saturday Market doesn't have permanent building, maybe we should allow them to continue to use them, and so forth. So we need to consider which commercial businesses are affected. You will see that in many of the Alaska cities that have passed the ban, they've defined affected retail business as the ones to which the ban applies. Do you notice I didn't use that term, the ordinances I drafted for you? I just didn't think it sounded good. We'll just call it a retail seller, and the ban applies to that retail seller under this chapter if a violation is issued. You just look, you're a retail seller under this definition, so instead of using an odd term to me, affected retail seller. But if you want to be consistent with other cities, maybe you want to use that terminology. Let's see. So the thickness is something of, I guess, a mystery if people aren't familiar what mils are and what kind of bag is 2.25 mils, that threshold we've seen, or the 4 mils, which we've seen in the original ordinance, and in the S version ordinance, changing to 2.25 mils. Well, we did a little research, and you see on the left, we've got some diagrams, and it says mil strength. The mil equals 1/1000th of an inch and measures the thickness of the bag. So 1 mil and 2 mil might be used for candy, gummy bears, and so forth, rather thin. 3 mil bags, a little thicker. So 6 mil bags might be used for hardware, screws, and so forth that you get in bulk at the hardware store. They're a bit durable, to give you a general idea. So on the right, we found an article that described your typical outdoor garbage bag that you might buy at Costco, for example. It would be about just under 2 mils thick. So the ban at 2.25 mils would apply to that thickness. But remember that the ban is only on plastic bags that are used to carry from a point of sale out of the retail seller's premises. So it's not, we have exceptions for outdoor garbage bags, for example, that you buy in a roll, and you're purchasing it to take home to use for yard waste, pet waste, and so forth. Those aren't being affected by the ban. I've just used this as an example to give you an idea. So what thickness bag are we talking about here? And actually see that Mr. Weddleton brought some hands-on samples that we might get to take a look at soon. So this bottom clip I have up here is from a law review article. It's written by an attorney who was involved in the San Francisco ban on plastic bags in 2007. And she kind of created, I guess, the cottage business or niche for herself, for her boutique law firm. Plasticbagglaws.org is her website. And from that law review article, I thought this would be helpful to explain where does that 2.25 mils standard come from. And it's something that's just kind of evolved out of their standard practice. They're relatively inexpensive. They cover the thickness you're trying to address by bags that are easily blown away in the wind and around our streets and so forth.
Pause there for a second.
Sure.
We have a question from Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I'm curious. I thought that the S version originally had 4 mil as the standard, not 2.25. And so how did we go back from 4 to 2.25?
Let's see. So I have in the original ordinance 4 mils. I went with the greater thickness, and that's just a ban. So it would cover the more thickness of bags. The S version is a hybrid between a ban and a fee. So a fee on reusable bags and on thicker plastic bags that might be considered reusable, but I lowered the 4 mils to 2.25 mils if we're imposing a fee on thicker reusable plastic bags and other reusables that a retail seller might provide to a customer. Sorry, I said we're imposing a fee, and that's a misstatement. We're requiring the retail sellers to impose a fee for each bag they provide to the customer. That isn't banned. And so this is one of the policy questions. Maybe you want to start at 2.25 as the ban and have no fee, or instead of going to 4 mils, you could do that by an easy floor amendment in 2 places. And the original ordinance.
From where I stand, I call it the Walmart exception. At 2.25, Walmart just cheated and created a bunch of bags that they gave away that they're calling reusable, they're calling recyclable, and I don't think that's acceptable. And so I wouldn't have signed on to 2.25. So
I think that would be, we're going to stack up to 4.
Okay.
Yeah, and the S version, you can amend it back to 4 mils if you wanted. So, let's see. As you mentioned, Mr. Constant, the experience in the lower 48 with a lot of bans that use 2.25 mils is retail stores would just buy thicker plastic bags over 2.25 mils and provide those to the customer for free. So they didn't change anything for the stores except they bought thicker bags, maybe a little more expensive. And so that seems like a workaround, and that's how the ban and fee hybrid ordinances developed in the lower 48. And I say that because the ordinances I've seen so far in Alaska and in various Alaska communities, they're all just a ban on certain thickness, or maybe all of them, but none of them have a ban on bags and a fee hybrid order. So we might be the first in Alaska to do that kind of hybrid ordinance if you guys prefer the S version. So we'll get into that a little more. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned Rep. Josephson's proposed legislation, House Bill 264C. He started in January as a tax on plastic bags as a way to discourage their use. But it evolved into, I guess after 2 House committee meetings, it evolved into a ban. And in that ban is where we get, I guess, I borrowed some language from this bill. For example, the definition of reusable bag being able to use at least for 75 times. That's from this House bill. The House bill also uses the 4 mils thickness in their ban. Now, it didn't go anywhere beyond 2 House committees, so that bill's dead. Maybe we'll see it reintroduced next January. Let's see. So we have the 2 ordinances. I've already talked about some of the differences here. I think I tried to summarize them up here, but we might also walk through the language in a couple of minutes. I think the big differences, some I've already touched on. Let's see. Well, actually, I think I've touched on most of these. One thing I wanted to point out, we have both of these taking effect in January 1 of 2019. So it allows stores that have bags in inventory now to use them up, provide them to customers, and get rid of them in reorder, give them some time to implement their alternatives. Let's see. So I've put here a table that shows what other cities in Alaska are doing and some of the differences in the details that we see among them. We have compiled most of these. If you look on the right, we've listed all these communities. Some of this information came from Rep. Josephson's bill and the work that the Ohio legislature did. There's more than 70 now communities that have banned. Some of them have a voluntary ban where the retail sailors in a small village have all agreed to stop using plastic bags, so they didn't have to adopt an ordinance or resolution. So ones with an asterisk has formally enacted some legislation for a ban. I wanted to make sure that I point out in our table, Homer, they enacted a ban. There was an outcry from the community, and they had a voter referendum that repealed their ban. So that's an interesting exception throughout Alaska as to what happened. I'm sorry, Bethel, also they had a ban. The restaurants in the community were all in an uproar about it. They didn't think restaurants should be banned from using plastic bags for, taking food home. So they repealed it, they reenacted it a couple of years later with an exception for restaurants. The Subaru I've listed up here, we have City of Wasilla, City of Palmer, they have enacted plastic bag bans. But before they did, the Subaru was considering a tax on plastic bags, similar to the House bill. But I understand that either voted down or they postponed it indefinitely and it hasn't gone any more forward. I think one of the things to look at is the thickness row. So some communities that say NA, they simply banned all plastic bags being given by retail sellers, whatever the thickness. And that's an interesting thing. Then most communities have the 2.25 mils thickness. And some that we've seen more recently, like Palmer passed in May and Kodiak passed in April, they have a 4 mils thickness ban. So they've went with the greater thickness there. And that's what Matt C was considering in the House bill. So many of the other cities who have passed ordinances prior to, I guess, this year, 2018, have the 2.25 mils thickness. Let's see. So now, what's Anchorage going to do? And that's up to our assembly here. So I hope some of these things I've pointed to help you consider policy choices to make. Now, I tried to put up the original ordinance and the S version just to show, well, the big difference is the intent of the ban and fee hybrid is pretty much, well, the effect is to, like I mentioned, encourage consumers to bring in their own their own reusable bags, so the retailer doesn't have to provide one and charge a fee, and you could save money that way, and also ban thinner plastic bags. That would reduce the community's carbon footprint and so forth. But we don't see that with many Alaskan communities, so perhaps the problem the Assembly wants to address is mostly the litter caused by plastic bags flowing around, and maybe our community's carbon footprint is going too far. That's what you need to judge and decide which way you want to go. But I want to present both these options to you. So that concludes our PowerPoint. I've got both the ordinances I can pull up if you want to walk through them quickly and see what they say, or we can open for questions, whatever the body would like to do.
Well, I think your presentation covered it pretty well in terms of the differences between the two. So why don't we open up your questions? Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
I want to thank you for doing this and your staff. It's a great presentation. I appreciate all the work you put into this. Thanks very much. Can you give us a copy of your presentation? I'd like to see it. If you send it to me electronically, I'd like to have it.
Sure.
Actually, can we also, for the clerk's office, why don't we get that posted with is this already posted in items of interest?
Yes.
So why don't we have the presentation included there as well?
Okay.
So the public can easily see it.
No other
Mr.
questions.
Weddleton?
Just wanted to thank you for all his work on this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
Maybe go through, then I'll have a couple minutes for show and tell.
Okay. I'm sorry, say again. When do you want to do your show and tell?
If there are other questions, I could just go.
Okay. Are there any questions from folks on the phone? From Ira or Felix?
No questions from Ira.
Okay. All right. Well, at this time then, why don't we have our presentation from the member from the industry, and then after him, we'll have some questions and answers, and then I believe there are people from the admin here. Is anyone from the admin here going to speak on the issue? Suzanne, are you going to speak?
I could speak on the landfill if somebody would like to.
Okay. Well, let's start with the member from the industry. So, Mr. Seaholm,
Yes.
could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
Matt Seaholm, M-A-T-T, last name S-E-A-H-O-L-M.
Okay. And what organization are you with?
I am the Executive Director of the American Progressive Bag Alliance. We are a division of the Plastics Industry Association.
Great. Okay, thank you. You have 3 minutes, if you don't mind, and then we'll have questions.
Very good. I will run through as quickly as possible. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some input on these proposed plans. I represent the manufacturers and recyclers amongst other types of packaging, plastic recycling. So we obviously have a vested interest, but a lot of experience also working with policies like this. So I just want to start by applauding the sponsor's goals of reducing overall litter and waste. Certainly something that we definitely agree with and is central to our mission. We've put tens of millions of dollars into investments of recycling infrastructure and education. So we certainly understand where this is coming from. Unfortunately, as a waste or litter reduction measure, I think both of these policies kind of miss the mark, and we've seen that in a number of places. Even if bag bans are being released, fewer plastic retail bags being used, they've never delivered any significant reductions in overall litter waste. They also come with a number of negative unintended consequences. Real quickly, kind of the biggest one is typically it pushes consumers to use less sustainable alternatives. It may not seem obvious, but in places like Boston, they actually saw an increase in waste from thicker plastic bags being used. That ban is actually and now in the process of being repealed. In California, they've had something similar to one of the proposals before us today. They actually have seen an increase in the consumption of both plastic and paper. So it's kind of backfired there as well. But there are a number of studies that have been done. Two recently released independent life cycle assessments show in comparison plastic retail bags versus other alternatives. There's no doubt about it. The Recycling Authority of Quebec said, without a doubt, for production, the end of its life, plastic retail bags has a far less environmental impact compared to any other. I can provide all of this information in 3 minutes. It's tough to go through everything, but as it works out, it's really just a matter of how much material, how much transportation, everything else that goes into both the manufacturer, the transportation, and ultimately the recycling or disposition of these items. There's no doubt about it. The plastic retail bags are actually the best. But perhaps more importantly, I just want to touch on the economic impact that comes with these, and we've seen it over and over again. These policies affect those who can least afford it. The folks making six figures, they don't really notice the difference. But that single mother who works hard to make every dollar go as far as possible, it shows up. And it's oftentimes in many of the places where it's ultimately voted down, it's for these reasons. And I think it's important to think about, as you guys are going through this process. But there's also the increased cost of business. I think that was alluded to in the previous presentation. I think you guys are well aware of what would happen there. But another one that I think is really important that we've seen is the increase in shoplifting. Seattle, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, a lot of these places that have passed these ordinances that either require reusable bags or certainly allow for many more reusable bags to be used. It ultimately results in higher shoplifting rates. There's no doubt about it. And that's an additional cost. I just wanted to raise for awareness. But
thank you, Mr. Seaholm. That's your time. But we have some questions for you. We'll start with Mr. Constant, then Mr. Peterson, then Mr. Dyson. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, could you please describe your understanding of the recycling process in Alaska? How that compares to other places?
Sure. So, I mean, you still have take-back programs that ultimately end up getting taken to either energy reclamation or recycling efforts through retailers. Plastic film is not taken in curbside recycling anywhere besides San Francisco and now Houston, where they've installed vent hoods. But where you have retailers that participate in take-back programs, that's the easiest and most effective way to achieve recycling.
Effectively, recycled goods in Alaska stay in Alaska, don't get recycled into new products unless they're very high-value products like aluminum. And so much talk about what's valuable in recycling doesn't make sense in Alaska. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding, when you mentioned millions of dollars spent on research, that bags were developed some time ago that could be made from corn stalks or other materials that are much more easily recyclable in a matter of years in a landfill. Why hasn't your industry gone to bags made of something other than plastic?
I don't think there's been any alternative that's been shown to be viable. I think if there were, both from a cost and scientific perspective, I think we would do it in a heartbeat. There's no doubt about it. But it's very clear that the availability of high-density polyethylene, as well as the low transportation and manufacturing costs associated with it, make it still the best option for businesses and consumers.
So it's just strictly profit incentive?
Absolutely not. As I mentioned before, I mean, it comes down to the environmental options as well, of alternatives. It's really easy to identify different materials that perhaps from an end-of-life perspective provide a different outcome, but at the same time, the amount of energy and material that goes into the production of it certainly does not offset any gains that would have otherwise been had.
Thank you. I'll leave Mr. Dyson in the queue. Is that good, Pete?
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr.
Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thanks for helping us out. Your perspective is valuable. Can you talk kind of in general terms of what the impact has been on businesses when they have to change kind of their supply logistics and the kind of point of sale hassles and so on?
Sure. It all depends on the different types of laws, but the obvious one is when you're requiring the thicker, more expensive option, there's just the purchase cost for the business that's forced to do it. I've heard anecdotes from anywhere from $35,000 to $60,000 per store in increase from going from the traditional thin gauge bags to 2.25 mils. So if you were to go to 4 mils, you're effectively moving from what's now, call it a $0.015 bag, to as much as a 9-cent alternative. And you can imagine with all of the number of bags that go out the door from a large grocery store, you can see how the costs pile up very quickly. And as much as we all love to believe that the retailers are able to absorb that, their margins are so incredibly thin, 1%, 2%, maybe 3% if they're lucky. That cost just gets passed on to consumers.
Yeah, follow up, Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you. I assume intuitively the large retailers can deal with this more efficiently and less cost per bag than the smaller ones. Would you comment on that, please, sir?
Are you talking about the compliance side of it, or the purchase cost? From a purchase cost, there's no real benefit. I mean, the price of the bag is the price of the bag. Certainly, you have scales of economy. The largest retailers might be able to get down a penny or something like that. But I mean, you're talking about increasing the cost of the bags that are currently being used 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 times. And even if you are able to get that down to maybe 6, you're still talking about tens of thousands of dollars each month in increased costs.
Yeah, I was thinking not just of the item cost, but just the administrative hassles and so on. That I would assume big companies can deal with that a lot more easily than a small business.
Yeah, no doubt. From a compliance standpoint, especially when you start talking about a tax and having to collect the tax and also justify the collection of the tax, reporting, yes, no doubt about it. Larger stores have the in-house accountants, store managers, etc. Small businesses, it usually just comes down to the individual business owner.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I have a question, Mr. Seaholm. Let me preface this by saying I don't think your industry is uniquely irresponsible or not altruistic. But you stated that these kind of bans, when they're not total bans, but rather, as we're looking at here, where it bans at 2.25 or 4 mils, actually perversely lead to an increase in consumption of plastic, right? Because they need these thicker bags. So my question is, then why do you oppose it? We're buying more of your product. Why are you here testifying in opposition?
Because we don't think it's a sustainable policy. We think it's bad public policy to do that. Yes, there are certain circumstances in which manufacturers might actually produce more plastic by weight than otherwise, but we think that's just bad public policy, and we would never get behind that. You know, we look at all of the facts just like, you know, many others that are interested in not just litter and waste, but the sustainable impact of all of our products. And we don't look at it from a dollars and cents perspective of, well, how could we sell the most plastic as we possibly can.
Okay. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. First, it may not be to you, but to for sure Walmart, I want to congratulate them for figuring out the workaround by providing these thicker, quote, reusable, quote, recyclable bags, but really effectively they're the same problem that we had in the first place in Walmart, in Wasilla. And so I think the point isn't so much to provide a bag at the proper cost for the consumer, but to actually shift behavior so that we have less bags moving through the system. And so I understand and appreciate your framing that it's about bags and units and moving the products, but ultimately to me, the intent here is to help people make the different decision, which is start carrying your own bags as much as possible. And so that is, I think, where we're aiming at, not so much to provide a flawless consumer plastic bag experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, so at this point, we're going to shift to the admin. Oh, you're there. Okay,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Welcome.
So following up on Mr. Constant's comment, so what is the dynamic that brings more shoplifting after bag ban? Mr. Siegel.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I mean, there are a couple of things that lead to it. Obviously, if everybody's bringing reusable bags, there's just an ability to slide a bag and slide product, merchandise of any sort into that bag. One of the biggest issues that we actually have seen is freezer bags or cooler bags that are brought in, look similar to the reusable bags that you might otherwise take to the grocery store, but they actually have a metal lining inside of them for insulation. That allows for the tricking of security systems, in magnetic security systems that would otherwise be triggered as you walk out the door. That's kind of been one of the biggest things that have really jumped up with the increase in the number of reusable bags. So I think there, we've heard some stories of significant loss from stores that have had to adopt these policies just because there are so many more reusable bags coming in the door.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Seaholm? All right, I don't see any. All right, so now we will go to, let me also say, we'll have time for people from the public to talk, but I want to say we're going to have another work session on this. I think there's going to be a lot of public comment on this. We've got the show and tell thing here too, so don't feel too pressured to rush things. We've got more time. We'll start with the admin now. Is it Ms. Caldwell? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Susanna Caldwell. I'm the recycling coordinator at Solid Waste Services. I'm just here today to talk about the landfill perspective when it comes to disposable plastic bags. They are tremendously challenging for us to deal with at the landfill. They catch wind quickly, they blow around, they cause a large litter problem at the landfill. I wish I could come to you today with data explaining exactly how many plastic disposable bags that we get. We don't have firm data on that. However, I can tell you we did a waste stream study in 2017, and we found that about 5 to 10% of all residential solid waste is composed of non-recyclable plastics. So that's not just disposable bags, that's also other forms of plastic films and plastic containers that you can't recycle, but that does give you some scope of what we're receiving from residential solid waste. To be clear, the landfill does work really hard to try to prevent these bags from escaping the landfill boundaries. We move the working face of the landfill every day in an effort to kind of prevent the wind from blowing away debris. We also have litter fencing that we put up that's movable, that we move depending on where the wind is blowing. And then we have exterior fencing that also catches the last bits of debris that are moving around. We also employ 4 seasonal full-time laborers. one of their primary jobs is picking up litter from around the landfill. A lot of that is plastic bags. It's not all of it though. So regardless of whether something like this goes through, it's unclear whether it would have any sort of cost savings for the landfill. But just so you know, it is quite challenging for us to deal with. Also, from a recycling standpoint, these plastic bags are a very low value commodity, and there are not a lot of outlets for them. A lot of local retailers do take them back, and the Anchorage Recycling Center accepts them. That's the only place you can take those for recycling. They are not accepted in curbside recycling, and they are actually quite challenging to deal with in curbside recycling because we send all of our recycling down to the lower 48 to be processed at a sorting facility. This material really gunks up the machines, it causes delays, and right now we're dealing with a recycling import ban from China that's really lowered the value of all recycling commodities, and they've already had to slow down their machinery. So the more they have to slow it down, the lesser value all of our recyclables are. So plastic bags are just one part of that problem.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. Any questions from Ms. Caldwell? John, and then Pete.
So you have 4 full-time but seasonal people picking up trash. Which seasons am I on?
It's because summertime, spring and summer, that's when we see the most litter debris around. It's easier to pick up because there's no snow on the ground. And we end up having to pick up a lot once spring breakout occurs. It's usually, it starts March and goes through about October when we have them hired on.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we went to the 2.25 thickness or bigger, is that something that doesn't jam up the recyclable machines, or would be something that we could possibly, be more effective to be used for curbside recycling?
Any sort of plastic film could never go into curbside recycling because regardless of, that thickness is too small to make a difference in curbside recycling in the machinery.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. Any other questions for Ms. Caldwell? Okay, not seeing any. All right, we're going to go now to show and tell time with Mr. Weddleton. Are you okay?
A couple points as a retailer. And I've been looking at this a lot, reading a lot, and then just looking at logistics at my stores. And some things like Fred brought up, as far as logistics at my store, is not a big deal. I mean, I just have paper bags. My store has paper bags instead of plastic in the same bins. Shipping and ordering them is the same kind of logistics. We have been seeing more problems with people bringing in their bags and steal. So the shoplifting to me is a big issue. And if everybody takes on bringing their own bags in, I got a real problem because it sure is easy just to throw stuff in there and walk out. So now I'm in a situation of checking everybody walks out the door, which is unpleasant for everyone. So that is a significant fear of ours. It's been going on for a while. So comparing bags, I got some samples of paper bags in, and I did an order that we should probably get later this week. So we're going to start doing paper and plastic with our customers and see what they like. So just an example, so you know what you're talking about a bit. I have here different bags that we use routinely with the thickness on them and how much they cost me. An example for comparison, here this yellow bag is, I think it's about 12 inches by 8 inches. And it is 1.3 cents including shipping, and a comparable paper bag is 4 cents. So it's substantial, and these are the main bags that we go through. I've got this little teal one is a little bit bigger, and this is the second most popular one, and a comparable bag, that one costs, it's 1.25 mil, it costs 2.5 cents. Comparable paper bag that worked was 5 cents. This purple bag, quite popular, is 3.7 inches, and I didn't have a paper bag that quite matched it.
2.7 mils? Is that what you're saying?
1.25 mil,
Okay.
and 3.7 cents. And then the handle adds on a little bit. And we have some bigger bags, the red one you see here, which is fairly thin. It is 0.6 mil. That cost me 4.3 cents. And a comparable size paper one that didn't really work very well, because it ripped, is 16 cents. So quite a bit. That's about 3.5 times the cost. So if I got vastly more quantities of the bags, they're usually, you can get 20% cheaper if I got a huge amount, like a year's supply. And some bags I'll do that. So it is potentially, you know, we spend probably $1,500 a year on bags at this point. So this could bump me up to $3,000. I think just switching to paper, people will be more attuned to maybe I don't need a bag and maybe skip the bag. So possibly there'll be some decrease. But would it double? So I'm at $3,000 a year potentially. For a small store, we notice that. We notice that more. Logistics are fine. Regarding the fee, we did 10 cents per bag for customers. It's very simple. For point of sale, it's a keystroke. It would be 2 keystrokes to add that on to fill. So it would be very, very simple for us to do it. We'd have some resistance because it's like, what happens to my 10 cents? People would be mad about it. You know, my guess is at Bosco's we would donate it to something and people would feel better. And I think what I would do is give them 10 cents if they brought their own bag, and they could get a wash, and that would be fine too. So there's ways to handle it, but there would be a pushback. People would be bugged by it, having this 10 cent fee. So anyway, that's my show and tell. I will pass these around so you can see. At least you'll know what the different things feel like.
So I have a question for you, John, and also for Ms. Caldwell, and I guess Dean, you on the queue as well? Okay. So my question is, you're showing us these paper bags. Paper bags seem noticeably thicker to me and sort of heavier and more substantial. And I remember, just in my reading, because it happened a long time ago, that one of the I believe that one of the plastic industry's arguments when we originally made this switch decades ago was that it actually plastic was better for the landfill because it was so much thinner, so much easier to crumple up. And so I guess for Ms. Caldwell, if there is this mass switch to paper, will it, fill up our landfill faster, even if it is sort of relatively small? Will there be a perceptible change in the amount of waste coming into our landfill by weight?
I don't have any data on that. However, I would say the paper bags are recyclable, so you could encourage diversion.
Okay.
It would not necessarily need to end up in the landfill.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. And again, I want to redirect the idea of switching to just having paper bags to the idea of moving people to either bringing their own or not using a bag is the purpose here. Not so much as to shift them to paper, so we support the paper bag industry of America and all of their lobbying interests, but instead change people's behavior. And if you go anywhere that's adopted one of these practices, it is no shock to people when you go to the grocery store and you either opt to not have a bag or they say, is this be okay? From Whole Foods, so they kind of progressive American standard bearer all across America, that's what they do. And so, to the idea of shoplifting increase, at our major retailers of groceries, we know that that's actually been an epidemic for the last 8 years, and I imagine the people who are generally shoplifting are already doing it, and I don't think that this procedure is going to boost that much, because those stores will tell you already we're under an epidemic of shoplifting.
Mr. Gates, you were in the queue?
Yes, I heard a little bit from, I think, the industry and Mr. Wilton, the costs on some retail sellers. And I wanted to mention in some of the ordinances we've seen, there's been some variations in terms of who it applies to. So in Bethel, for example, I think I mentioned the exempted restaurants. And then in the House Bill 264, that had it applicable only to retail sellers with gross receipts annually of over $250,000. So it wouldn't apply to smaller retailers. I'm not sure where Bosco's falls in terms of that, but and then the Matsu tax that they were considering, it would only apply to retail sellers with over 1 million of gross receipts annually. So that's, I guess, just one of the policy choices you can consider. If you want to exempt smaller retailers, you can set a threshold in terms of who this might apply to.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Dyson, you're in the queue.
Yeah. To the sponsors, I would suggest to get some information from sewer treatment people. When I was in this position 30 years ago, the plastic was plugged into strainers and so on, and in some cases messing up pumps and the seals on pumps. And I suspect that probably. And it intrigued me about newspapers. My newspaper, perhaps appropriately, comes in a prophylactic cover, and Maybe that's for my protection, but I think that happens all over. And
Correct.
it's I saw in this version that there's a line in here about old growth timber, old growth. I think that's stupid for us to put in here. First of all, there's hardly any logging going on in our state. And the logging that should be going on is the beetle kills all over the upper part of Mount Valley. That's old growth, almost all black spruce. Where we've had burns, it can often be economic to go in and harvest those trees that are still standing, and so on. Now, in the past, I don't believe that any significant amount of Alaska trees were going to pulp. The big ones were going to peelers and so on, but I don't think there's anything about this that's going to affect logging and the loss of old growth timber.
Where is that in here? Do you know?
And just, and I question putting it, no harm putting the carbon.
If I may, it's on page 2, line 34 of the S version.
Yeah.
It's the definition of recyclable paper bag.
And then on shoplifting, all my crimes are 60 plus years in arrears. Did a lot of shoplifting, and it's really helpful to have a bag that you carry in or a backpack. Otherwise, you got to jam the stuff in your pockets and inside your belt. And I believe the gentleman is absolutely true. This really helps, particularly small and medium-sized things that are being lifted.
Thank you, Mr. Dexon. So I have a question, I guess it's for the sponsors and also for Mr. Weddleton. I'm sort of puzzled why we would mandate a 10-cent fee. Why not let the retailers decide? So in your case, could you just add a 10-cent fee? I mean, it might discourage people from shopping, obviously, but if you're providing them the more expensive bag, why wouldn't you could add a fee or not add a fee? Why not let the market decide?
So I would not personally. I've learned in my 34 years of retail, don't tick off your customer.
Sure.
Never just tick off the customer.
If I may,
That's a good thing.
Now, what I would do, and may do no matter what happens, is give people a dime off if they bring their own bag. Because that would save me a few pennies. And it'd be kind of, and the dime, I don't know if it added up to too much of my stock. But that, I might try that.
Of course, I heard from 2 grocers, large-scale grocers, system people in Alaska, and they said that they prefer the fee because it gives them a buffer from the public. They said we have to do this, and so it gives them a hammer in the way out.
Right. So I mean, I guess I kind of understand that, but what you're doing then is saying that you are shifting the burden onto the consumers away from the retailers, and then the consumers simultaneously and rightly blame the government because it is our fault. And the retailers will say that too. This is because of the government.
I think you're missing the point, though, and the point isn't that we are going to start giving them bags because they pay for, but the idea is to shift them from using throwaway bags to using bags that can be reused to bring their own bag. And so as long as we keep our eyes on that as the focus, then all of these issues, although they're important, are steps on the way to that goal, not the goal itself. The goal isn't to tax. The goal isn't to give the retailer the means to tax or have an extra 10 cents, because our interest is not there. The goal is to provide a reduction in the use of these materials that are wasteful and littering, and come up with a behavioral modification that will get people to use their own bags, which happens all up and down the West Coast.
Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was younger, BYOB meant something different. Now I guess it's going to be bring your own bag. I suppose people will eventually get used to it. But I just mentioned something to John here as we were going through the discussion that I thought I'd bring up for the gentleman with the plastic manufacturing group. They're going to be growing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of acres of industrial hemp across this country in the near future if they aren't already. And hemp has been a proven product to be used to make paper and numerous other substances, and that might be something that they might want to switch over to, because obviously it would recycle. So,
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Train.
Just in talking to people in the hemp industry, it can in fact be made into bags. We do have a growing industry in this state,
you know, we do.
so it's possible that.
One, if I might, I thought about adding a whereas in this, that we recommend investigating alternative production materials such as hemp in the future.
But we don't make any bags in Alaska, do we? I mean, we import all of these. So even if we were growing hemp here, we're not going to set up a bag
Maybe
factory.
we could.
Wait, though, hold on. I have to say, there is somebody here, I think, or maybe there was, from a group that does actually make bags that they give away, right? She's not here right now. What was that group called?
Oh, boomerang bags?
Boomerang bags. So in fact, there are people that are, they're not growing the cotton or the material, but they're actually sewing and giving away bags.
Cloth reusable bag.
Yeah.
Mr. Weldon.
Going back to the 10-cent fee, I think it'd be one of those nickel and dime things that drives people crazy, but what it does is there really is no market mechanism now for whether or not they take it back when it's free for them.
Yeah.
But you create a market by saying here's a fee, and they have control over it. Because it's to bring them back. So you actually creates a market by putting that on there, drive people crazy.
Well, it drives people crazy, but I also am worried that it disproportionately impacts. I suspect that there will be lower income folks that come and make large purchases, perhaps large families in places like Muldoon, the Muldoon and Fred Meyer, that are more likely to be impacted by that 10-cent fee and more likely to feel that 10-cent fee than a wealthier folk who might bring their own cloth bag.
And so to that, I would suggest we could put in an amendment that provides a waiver for people who purchase with wood cards, or come up with a mechanism that allows the retailer to have some discretion in which they provide those, so we don't adversely impact my constituents and yours, but at the same time, we achieve a broader goal of moving the marketplace to making better decisions.
Okay, we have 3 to 4 minutes now. I'm going to open it up for public comment, and then again, we're going to continue this conversation.
The 10th of August.
The 10th of August, and then is it the 14th? When is the public hearing on this? Actually?
14th.
14th, and we don't necessarily have to pass it that day either. Is there anyone here, Gene? I want to see if anybody else wants to comment on this particular topic, not just the public process. Is there anyone here who wants to talk about the bag ban itself? Okay, go ahead, Gene. Please identify yourself for the record.
My name is Eugene Crow-Hayden, and I represent myself, public process. Public process is an appropriate decision made by the governing body is more likely to conflict of interest. Please know that the Massachusetts Valley. Also note, I attended the public hearings dealing with the plastic bag issue in Palmer, in Wasilla, and the Massachusetts Borough. Also note this important thing that you, looks like your attorney did not really clarify is, Anchorage's got police powers, Palmer's got police powers, Wasilla's got police powers, the Massachusetts Borough Assembly, they cannot deal with police powers because they don't have police powers. And so when they deal with the ban thing, they first waited. First of all, they can't ban. They can put a tax or whatever. But they held off to hear from what the city of Wasilla and Palmer has done. Okay. Next is this language. Because I attended as much as I have, the first time I've heard a comment was not in Palmer, Wasilla, but right here in this room today by Senator Welton. The idea of stealing, the theft issue. It is a question that I thought of from the beginning. Is the idea is that reusable bags, whatever they are, people walking in and walking out, how can you control theft? There's also this, if you have another issue to this, and you're talking about grocery stores, whatever. You got an issue of health, cross-contamination. Where are these bags coming from? How are these public? Are they cleaned out? They're going in? You got cross-contamination. Where's the control on that? There's a health issue here. That was not addressed at the meetings that I attended, both in Palmer and but that's the thing that for the first time I heard was the idea of theft. And theft is a big issue. But also the thing is the idea of saying a ban on plastic bags. I'm hearing that, but in reality, when you look at what you're doing with respect and what Palmer Wasilla has done, the idea of saying a ban on plastic bags, you are not banning a plastic bag, period. You are basically taking a different category of what type of plastic bag you are allowing in the community. So the idea the public is led to believe we're going to have a ban on plastic bags in Palmer, Wasilla, or wherever, that's not happening here. The truth of the matter is what is happening is a different type of category that's being discussed here, Palmer, Wasilla, as what type of plastic are we going to allow in the community. So end this scenario and be transparent, because you need a label that title as really it is. It's not a ban on plastic bags, it's a ban on the type of category of plastic in the community, because a ban on plastic bags means a switch over to a thing that would be not plastic.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at the work session today? All right, hearing and seeing no one, this work session is closed.